Yeah, I don't know how many people you've actually met. I don't know if anybody, honestly, because I think the last conference we had at Pro, I don't think you were able to be there. So I know some of them met Bobby, but I don't think you've met really anybody else from this year. I know you had met Javi and maybe Daniel that helped me last year. You knew Daniel from, I guess, at Pro, and he
Yeah.
helped you up with Brooke. But and they're actually going to be on our call. Javi, we're going to talk to Javi on Friday, and then we're going to talk to Daniel next week as well. So we're kind of um, right in the middle of getting these knocked out. So to get started, just to kind of introduce yourself to everybody, what's your title at Cal? What's your teams that you're responsible for? And then what has your path been? You know, getting to being at your position at Cal.
Yeah. So my name's Chandler Daniel. If you ever go to email me or look me up, it might come. First name might come up as James, which is my first name, but I go by Chandler. I'm the assistant strength and conditioning coach at California Penn West, formerly California or University of California. Outside of that, myself and Robert Sapisi are the full-time strength coaches there. So I'm one of two full-time strength coaches at Cal. Along with that, we have two graduate assistant positions, and then we typically have like anywhere 1 to 3 interns or work studies with us throughout the year and throughout the summer also. But my path to this, I was locally from the Pittsburgh area, went to high school around here. I went to Duquesne University. While I was there, I played football, did my undergrad in athletic training, graduated in 2018, and I was behind on some like clinical hours from playing in the fall. We didn't have to at the time prior to the athletic training programs requiring them 5 years for masters. At the time it was a 4-year bachelor program. So I would do summer clinical hours and I wouldn't have to do any hours while I was in season in the fall. So uh, I miscounted, somebody miscounted, and I was behind on hours at the walk date. So 2018, I walked, but I wasn't officially graduated. And Duquesne's policy was you have to be graduated before they allow you to sit for the BOC certification exam for athletic training. So graduated, walked. This was May. I was not a certified athletic trainer at the time. So I had to finish up hours, and I didn't sit for that BOC exam until August. So I was in a bit of a predicament of, I had done some like internships at like a clinic type setting or like a physical therapy type setting. And I didn't really love that. And I knew that by the time I had taken the exam, had gotten my hours, had become certified, the ship would have sailed to get GA positions rolling, to get positions in high schools or college settings. So I was looking like I was going to have to be in like a PT, physical therapy, sports medicine, hard sports medicine setting. Wasn't a huge fan of that. More so just the demographic. I like working with athletes. I like working with younger individuals with a bit more incentive than just daily living. It was during that time when I was finishing up my clinical hours. I had come and I was training with a friend of mine who was a throwing athlete for the track team at Cal. And I was speaking to the assistant strength coach there at the time. And he was like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Man, not doing anything because didn't get my hours right." Um, Wound up being the graduate assistant 2018 to 2019 at Cal U. After that, I worked at private sector, Pro Performance in West Virginia for a year and a half, like a year and some change, I want to say. There, I was contracted out to Brook high school in West Virginia up in the Panhandle. While I was there, all teams went through me, even including like their cheer team went through me. They had a very competitive cheer team. I worked with all of them Monday to Friday, attending games, attending practices whenever it was appropriate. And then in January here, it'll be the start of my 4th year, I want to say. 1, 2, 3. Start of my 4th year at Cal, which is pretty cool to say out loud. And Adam's the oldest one on the call, so I guess I'm starting to feel old as well. So we're all climbing up there. and that's kind of been my path into it. So starting off as just an athlete in it, I've been hurt multiple times, which kind of like in high school, which led me to athletic training route. I was around athletic trainers a lot in high school, and I was like, I want to play ball at the next level, and I also want to stay in this. Like, this seems like an amazing job. And then going through the college setting, being an athlete in that while actively taking athletic training classes, at junior, senior year, doing clinical with Duquesne's athletic training staff, like giving me a bit more insight into like a peek behind the curtain of what that looks like. So I was definitely privileged to that as a young athlete. Tore my ACL in college as well. So a lot of injuries and a love for sports itself kind of led me to this route. And then, falling in love with strength conditioning, I would say, into my graduate assistant position. And yeah, essentially a lot of happy accidents from either getting hurt playing ball or being in the right place, right time. But it's an amazing job. I really couldn't ask for a better one, But yeah, that's been my path.
Good. Two things that I wanted to ask. I thought you guys were getting rid of the GAs at Cal. Is that something that's going to end up sticking around?
Yeah,
Or is
so
that...
there was kind of a question mark on it. Like, I know we had talked, I think in the summer we talked, and there was a bit of a question mark with the merging of Cal, Edinburgh, and Clarion. Positions were kind of up in the air, but we've secured them for, we will not have them for like our summer semesters anymore, but we'll have them for our fall and spring semester. So yeah, we're lucky on that part as well. So we only had one graduate assistant this past fall because we were anticipating like losing that position. So, and we're bringing on another one for the spring. And then we're set to have another one set up for next fall. So we're locked in pretty well with GA positions. Next fall there'll be another opening, but like for the spring we'll be full staffed, which will be great.
Gotcha. And then the one thing that I think is true that I was going to point out when you mentioned about being at Brook, I think at that point in time, and it's probably unfortunately still the case, you were probably the only high school strength coach in the state of West Virginia.
I think I was the only, like with the title, like, because it was, things were happening in that weight room before me getting there, So I think with the title, like a full time, I think you may be correct. Like the first full time, maybe not first, but at the point in time, the only full time high school strength and conditioning coach, West Virginia. That's pretty huge. I need to look into the details on that. Throw that on the resume there. That's pretty awesome.
Well, I know that the only thing that would be close to that would be the fact that the three high schools here in Mon County have the GAs from WVU, UHS, MHS, and Clay Battelle. They get GAs, but they're not full time where they're like actually there. Right. In a head strength conditioning coaching role, like you were at Brook. So I thought that was kind of interesting thing to point out. So what teams do you work with right now at Cal, and kind of what does, you mentioned before we started the call officially, you mentioned like right now kind of being a slow period for you because you don't have any winter sports teams. So what does what responsibilities do you have, and what does your schedule usually look like? Most of the guys and girls in the call are going to be familiar with what we do at Fairmont, obviously being a D2 level, but just kind of the differences between maybe how you and Bobby run things versus how I run things, in terms of like your schedule and your day-to-day with the teams that you run in the fall and in the spring.
Yeah. So California is at Division II level as well. I have I have football, baseball, softball, men's soccer, and women's tennis. So those are my 5 teams. Bobby has the other ones. He has basketball, track and field, women's basketball. So like kind of big sports, mine would be like roster size, mine would be football, his would be track and field. And then we typically split up the other ones from there. So like a typical year, I would say, like going out broadly first would be starting up whenever classes begin that first Thursday. As you know, all out of season teams can begin. So by that time I would have had football through a couple weeks of camp, men's soccer through camp. And then coming back in, I would see tennis likely just before that first Thursday because it's a beautiful sport where they're just always in season. So I'd have those 3 teams rocking, and then we would trickle in baseball and softball. And practices for baseball, softball wouldn't pick up right away. So there's a bit of a gap there for their preseason before they start on field. And then with them as well, at the end of that semester, they cut out practices for the last like 2.5, 3 weeks. So we pick up another day of training there as well. Once the fall semester's over, pretty much whenever, like right before Thanksgiving break, like Thanksgiving break hits, we come back. It's the week before finals, and you're not allowed to have like mandatory lifts. So everything shifts on my side of things to open times and optional times. So I'll have workouts on the boards. My interns and GAs will facilitate the in-person training. Finals happen, and then at that point in time, I've shot out a 5-week program for all of my teams because everybody leaves, comes back, and we're set to pick up. I think classes start, I want to say the 16th maybe. So we'll pick up that first Thursday with all of my fall sports, and likely that first Tuesday with my baseball and softball. And through the spring, it's essentially the inverse of that. It'll be out of season for my football, men's soccer, another in season for tennis, and then baseball and softball will be going in season as well. And they pick up games relatively close to whenever we pick up. I think like mid to late February, they'll start with games. And then semester wraps up during the summer. I think every summer I've been here actually. So the past 3 summers, I've had anywhere from 20 to 30 football athletes stay on campus. Go kind of Division II restrictions. We can't provide room and board. We can't provide food for them. So they're paying out of pocket to be on campus. So 20 to 30 guys, we would train Monday to Friday, 2 hours a day. And then on their own, they would come up in the afternoons to the field and do their own like player ran practice. Typical day though, I have teams as early as 7. Bobby typically, we program around the morning to make it work and flow well. But any given morning, we can see 3 teams between 6 and 8 o'clock. Typically begin my mornings at 7 o'clock. I usually have like a training block for myself. Typically, it's like 9 to 10 o'clock. And then like in the fall, for example, I would have football 9, 10, 11, 12 days done at 2 o'clock. Meetings in and around there with staff, impromptu meetings, consistent conversations with athletic training staff. There's not a lot of downtime, like going back to what I said before the call, and right now currently there's a ton of downtime. I go from, I hit the door, I'm coaching within 30 minutes. I have an hour of training, which isn't really downtime. Eat some food, get back on the floor, eat some food again, meet with coaches at the end of the day, and then head home. So pretty packed day. Not a lot of so programming's done on the periphery of that. That's done at home, work laptop, or like early mornings at home.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to the way we kind of have things flow. Part of, and I don't know if my staff even knows this, but part of the way that I kind of do it, just because I have 2 people coming from Morgantown, other people live in Fairmont. So it's one of those things we're just trying to make sure that people I kind of do more of like a shift schedule than I do like a team assignment schedule. So if you end up working ABC shift, you're going to work with the teams that show up during those hours that you're scheduled to work. So a little bit different where you guys are kind of fully, like if your team trains at 6 a.m. and then you have another group that doesn't train till 3 p.m., like you're going to be there all day waiting for them. Whereas I try not to do it. It's kind of, but
so like Bobby, for example, and proximity, like he lives 15, 20 minutes away. So his schedule, he does have like those early teams in, like it's sometimes like a 6:30 for like a women's basketball or volleyball. And then there were days, depending on the time of the year, that he doesn't have another team until 2. But with kind of our facility and having like that additional offshoot of a weight room, the hours don't have to be like 7 to 7 o'clock anymore. We can double book teams, which is really huge. And that definitely shortens our day. And my commute's like 50 minutes to an hour, depending. So I'm definitely grateful for the fact that we can cram in all of our athletics in the morning. Now in the spring, football does train in the afternoons. Works out well for their team dynamic and kind of what they want out of the spring. And then my day just shifts. So my day at Cal starts like 11, and then it's going to finish at 6:30, 7 o'clock, as opposed to coming in for a 7 a.m. or a 6 o'clock lift.
Right. And I'm definitely going to ask you a little bit more about football here in a minute, but I wanted to go back and you mentioned the teams that you have in the fall, and then the teams that are spring sports that you have in the fall, and the teams that are fall sports that when you have them in the spring and their off season, like football, like soccer. How many days a week are you guys, like your fall in season team? So football, soccer, how many days a week are they training in season? And then like baseball, softball that are out of season, how many days a week are you having them train during the fall? And then
So in the
what does
fall, I
look
will
like?
see, starting in camp, I'm going to see football twice a week. The camp times, we typically try to line them up so they'll be the same exact days as whenever the in season actually begins, class begins. So I'll see them Monday, Wednesday. I'll see men's soccer Tuesday, Thursday. So I'm seeing football Monday, Wednesday. The camp training looks pretty different from the in-season training in terms of like goals that I have for my football team. But those sessions are going to last 45 minutes to an hour, maybe a bit longer in camp. But once we get to classes, it'll be 45 minutes to an hour. We have guys that if they do have class, they leave at 45. Whenever the clock hits 45, everybody else stays until the work is finished, typically like maybe 55, about 5 minutes before the top of the hour. Men's soccer is going to come in Tuesday, Thursdays. We get the whole team in at once, which is really great. There's like a common hour, so we take advantage of that, get all of them in Tuesday, Thursday. They play games typically on Wednesdays, and they play games on the weekends as well. So their lifts are also pretty different from like what their lifts in the spring would look like, because they come in, I see them for a fitness test on a Monday. They come in for their first quote unquote lift on Tuesday, and their first match is that Saturday. So preseason for men's soccer, I'm not sure how this is on your side of things, but it's non-existent. Like in the fall, you come in, you do a fitness test, you get a thumbs up, thumbs down. We try to address that in the time that we have, and then you're playing. And then after that, we do needs assessment in the front end for both teams. But for men's soccer, it does get tricky because it's hard to push for adaptations in season when they're playing so much. In camp they're playing 2 hours, 2 practices like most days in camp, and then their competition days are beginning pretty much immediately. So we can go crazy week one, and then guys can't play game one. So that does become challenging. For baseball, softball, I'm going to see them 3 days a week, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday for all of them. The Tuesday, Thursdays are typically general resistance training, and then the Fridays, depending on the time of the semester, in the front end we typically do more conditioning work and fitness-based work on the Fridays. And then whenever practices pick up, baseball drops their Friday so that they have more hours for practice. And then softball, their Fridays shift from conditioning to more just speed and running work. Keeping the Tuesday, Thursdays on. And then at the end of the semester, baseball picks back up their Fridays. And then that looks more like soft tissue auxiliary work. Because at that time, my pitchers are likely going to be shut down. I'll be able to take advantage of a bit more kind of stimulus and training that it may be a bit more hesitant to do when they're doing their inner squads and their World Series that they do here at Cal. So their baseball's lifts are typically programmed, based upon how active they're going to be on their field. And then tennis, similarly to baseball, I see 3 times a week in the front of the semester. And then once they pick up their competition days, that'll drop down to 2 days a week. For them, also similar to baseball, softball, they had one kind of specific fitness-based, conditioning-based day, and the other 2 days are more traditional resistance training. For football, men's soccer, those are all resistance training, those sessions.
Are you for the conditioning stuff? Are you running that yourself? Are you writing it up and the coaches are doing it, or is it something they do with their sport coaches? How's that work?
So for football, because they're not conditioning on my time, by the time that camp has started, I've already had multiple conversations with the coaches, like going through the lens of football. Before camp, we talk about what is a fitness test? Why are we doing it? What do we do if whatever markers we're assigning to that test of like a pass fail? Like, what do we do if there's a deficit? And then what is conditioning to look like in season throughout the season? I'm not there at their practices, as they practice in the afternoon, and my day would then become like a 7 to 7 o'clock. So for that, I go over a protocol for one of their with a defensive coordinator. He facilitates conditioning at the practice, and we talk about, hey, this is what today's going to look like if the guys' practice is really light, and we can kind of tap into this a little bit more. This is what it's going to look like if you think the guys did a lot of work in practice, and maybe check that fitness box like throughout the practice due to like 2-minute drills, due to smart practicing, smart programming of the practice. This is what this is going to look like if, we just came off a game and guys are destroyed. So all those like contingencies, whenever I'm not there running it, have already been filtered through and talked about. And we also meet Mondays as a staff as well. So before they even get onto the field, I would have already seen all of the guys in lifts. I come in with the football staff. I come in with the athletic training staff. We go down the roster for injuries. And then athletic trainer leaves the room. Other coaches leave the room. Me and the defense coordinator are like, okay, what does conditioning look like this week? Do we need to keep this going? What time of the year is it? How far are we into the season? And then for my other teams, men's soccer, kind of similarly, that's done on their time. Me and the coach have conversations about, what that should look like, when that should look like. Similarly with football, like, what is the goal of this fitness test? What do we do if there's deficits with our very short turnaround time for soccer to their competition? And then baseball, softball, and tennis. Baseball, softball, the conditioning happens on my side of things. Baseball also does more like sprint work up at their field on their own time. And then tennis, we do the single day conditioning, and then they also do some on their time as well.
Yeah. What we can start getting into a little bit of these football questions that I was going to have for you. What does that conditioning assessment look like for football? And kind of what is, like, if guys don't pass it, like, what is that kind of turned into? And what's your thought process with that? Because honestly, that's something that every year that I've been here at Fairmont, we've done something differently. Every year it's kind of trended more in the direction that I'd like it to trend, being very like anaerobic versus being very aerobic. But I'm one of those where I'm kind of in the same boat. Like, I don't have the ability to spend. I don't go to football practices other than maybe during camp. I'll watch a 30 minutes of practice or something. And then once the semester starts, I'm with other teams all the way up until, there's some days where I leave after football practice is already over. So I just don't have the ability to be out there and do that. So, and Caleb's on the call. He's a football player for us, but I don't think they actually really did a whole lot of extra conditioning this year, which, again, I think my personal opinion is if you run practice at a high tempo, high pace, then in a high intensity, then you're getting most of your conditioning work done.
Sure. Yeah.
But especially early in the year, like you were mentioning, like if you're early in the season, guys came in, they didn't pass whatever the fitness assessment was, then you do kind of have to dose some of that in there. But what do you guys use as kind of your initial assessment or eval of, are guys in shape? Are they not in shape? And then kind of how do you correct those things, those limitations if they're not?
Yeah. So like in terms of we chose to go with the traditional 300-yard shuttle, using like the 25-yard shuttle variation of it. We ran it twice, and then we ran it for time based upon positioning. So bigs, mid, skills. So really straightforward in terms of that. Copy paste protocol there, not reinventing anything with that. But on the front end of things, we had, like I said, like 25, 30 guys stay in the summer. So even those, some individuals that maybe came 3 out of those 5 days a week, they would have amassed a good base of fitness in itself. And the last 2 weeks of the summer, on the Fridays, we ran the 300-yard shuttles with like very strict times, like very difficult times to make. And then for the incoming athletes, I gave them a 5-second buffer. So my expectations for the guys that had trained with me for 2+ months was, hey, we're going to run this to a T. Like, this is going to be hard. All the guys that stayed past it, so they were exempt from the conditioning whenever they came in. And then prior to the entire team running it, I had the conversation with the coaching staff, because last year, early in the season, they felt as if they were a bit unfit first 2 games. After the first 2 games, they're like, okay, we got our legs underneath us. Everything looked better. First 2 games last year, they were fourth quarter, last couple minutes are deciding the game, both of their first 2 games last year. And they felt like they weren't able to close those in because they were just gassed at the end of the game. So that was a big talking point before the first day of camp was, what do we do about this deficit that we saw last year, and how do we like smartly go about it? So I brought up what is a test, what is a 300-yard shuttle. Using it as, a pass or fail is great, but, diving a little bit deeper and realizing that there's a bit of nuance to the test itself, right? So 300 yards is not going to happen in a football play. It's not going to happen. So already, it'd be easy to say, well, that's not an appropriate test. But if we're just looking at general fitness, which is essentially what we want to drive for, it's an okay test. But keeping in mind, and this is what I went into it with, is like, hey, if we have a 340-pound athlete not pass this test, we can run them as much as we want to run them, but there's some like legit limitations he's going to face, and likely he needs to just lose weight if he wants to pass it in the 75 seconds that we're asking him to. And at that point, he's not going to be as good at his position. So once like that was clear and that was understood, it's like, okay, we understand that this isn't, if you can't pass this, you shouldn't play. Once we got past that, what we ended up doing for skills guys that didn't pass their test at their time, so they would come in 2 lifts during camp. That first lift, they would actually go do steady state cardio. So the skill guys that I missed that failed their conditioning test, I only saw them once a week during camp. Actually, no, I didn't see them at all. They went both days to do cardio. And it was an interesting conversation too. It was like, how much do we sacrifice on resistance training and strength conditioning training versus like getting these guys in shape? And from the coach's standpoint, they're like, we need our skills guys to be fit, as opposed to the linemen that failed. One of those 2 days, they would go do steady state. They would train with me on the second day. And then also on the second day at practice, they would do an additional conditioning, like running or like a shuttle based test. The reason why we didn't have the skills guys do more conditioning on field is that, like, if you would look at their total mileage in practice already, it's massive. Like how much my corners and wide receivers are running, like just from the practice, like how much mileage they're getting. And then for me to finish and be like, okay, let's go run some sprints. Like if our goal is to have them come back the next day and be recovered, we needed to choose a modality that they'd be able to recover from. So that's why we decided to sacrifice some resistance training the first 2 weeks of the season, get them 4 steady state sessions. And after the season and throughout the season, kind of doing like a bit informal with the athletes and a bit more formal with the coaches, like how they perceived it, how they think that they felt. Across the board, everyone, the skills guys that were kind of in that deficit come in, they felt good about it. They felt ready and prepared for that first game of the season. And it was the only sacrifice was my side of things, but it was a willing sacrifice. And then whenever seasons picked up, they would condition 1 to 2 times a week. And typically those looked like some sort of like shuttle running. The beginning of the season, I start with like really short shuttles. So we don't get over 25 yards in that fatigue state, in that max effort state, like really early in the semester. I've played through it. I have seen other coaches do it. Like we come in day one, all right, guys, we're running 110s or something like that. And we get 3 guys pulling their hamstrings like in camp. And especially if we're going to do our conditioning at the end of the practice, we're already fatigued. If you get guys that haven't ran, like haven't sprinted max effort over 30, 40 yards, and now we're fatigued, we're just going to see soft tissues happening. So typically in camp and then the first week, first season, we're not getting over 25 yards during those conditioning sessions. And then after that, we do gassers, so like cross field. That's kind of the distances that we're working with for the conditioning. Varying rest time, varying reps, depending on where we're at in the season, depending on kind of things I keyed into also. I leave a lot to the coach. I trust him. We've worked together the entire time that I've been here. So I feel confident that he's not an individual that's going to drive the guys into the ground. And if anything, the entire coaching staff has gotten to a point that, conditioning isn't really a punishment. It's something that's needed. It's to help us be consistent in this fitness area. It's just like training. It's just like getting your reps in. So we don't really connotate negativity with conditioning. Even in the summer, it's like, hey guys, we got our upper body auxiliaries today on Friday, and we're going to go on field and we're going to condition. Like, It's not like Chandler's going to kill us today because we were horrible this week or we got all these extra reps. It's like, no, we have this set amount of work to do every week. And this is just the part of the game, like doing this preparatory work. And I think like driving that narrative has been really fantastic for the staff and also really fantastic for the athletes, because now there's no fear to conditioning. There's no fear of when is this guy going to stop blowing this whistle? It's, hey guys, we have 2 rounds of these short shuttles. You guys are like, okay, I know what that is. Or we have 4 rounds of these guys. It's like, okay, I know what that is. But yeah, I think that answered the question. The test.
No, it definitely did. Is that something that do you guys let them know or in the summer, hey, this is what we're going to do? Or did you wait till they showed up for camp?
So we ended up waiting until like 2 weeks before, because we were so in the past we had ran the shuttle, but we hadn't done any like contingencies for pass fail. It was more of for the coaches side of things so that they can see just who's been doing work. But based upon like last year's start, the coaches were like, hey, is there a way that you can help us like rein this in, this deficit that we saw? So this was the first year that we had done the steady state protocol and the extra conditioning if you didn't pass the test. And we let them know, I think a week and a half or 2 weeks out. And now they know. So for next year, they're very much aware of it. And kind of going into like things that are not said with that, I expect that if anything, we're going to get 3 or 4 more guys that show up for the whole summer, because they know if they pass the test, then they don't have to run it day one. So there's definitely some silver linings to that as well. So I think that's the most I've ever surprised an athletes with something like that. Like that's the closest proximity to a surprise I've ever given an athlete. I'm not a big fan of athletes walking into the room not knowing what's about to happen. But it was like a week and a half, 2 weeks. So.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm on the same page with a lot of that too. And that's something, again, part of it is just sometimes, I hate to say it, but like people just are athletes, coaches, everybody's just kind of checked out over the summer. So sometimes
Sure.
it's like, we don't even know there's times where I don't even know what the fall camp schedule looks like until about 2 days before fall camp. So, it's one of those things where like hard to know what conditioning we're even gonna be able to do. But anyway, you mentioned 2 things I want to make sure we talk about. Obviously, especially coming from the athletic training side, I want to talk a little bit about injury mitigation. Obviously, it's kind of like the buzz term, like injury prevention. I don't believe in injury prevention to an extent. I think training obviously helps. I think we try to do our best we can. As Buddy Morris says, if you don't want to get injured, don't play sports. But there is something to be said about it. I do think that we have a role to an extent to try to mitigate as much as possible. So that was one of the things I want to ask you, is to touch on, what kind of, you don't have to get into like what injuries you guys have had, but maybe some things that like, hey, we had a handful of these. This is what we're trying to do to limit them next year, or this is what we had last year. This is what we limited via this way this year. Because, for us, last year we had no soft tissue injuries. This year we had like 3 or 4 guys. We had a guy basically missed the whole season with a hamstring that he kept pulling. And we changed nothing. Like literally this year, if anything, I think we were more dialed in this year than we've ever been. So it's one of those where I'm like, sometimes I'm like, I don't know what else to do. I mean, honestly, I don't know. But that's the first thing I want to start with. And then maybe kind of just tie that into like what especially for football, what your in-season kind of just thought process for training is. Like, what does that 45 minutes look like? What is the most important things? What are kind of your big rocks in terms of you have to get done? And whether that's for football in season or even like a sport like baseball in season, like, again, tying that back to that injury mitigation aspect.
Right. Yeah. So like going back to like what we can do in the field, football's a really cool sport because it's so high contact that, guys are going to be hurt. Typically every Monday I come in, out of my 4 groups I have, a minimum of 1 guy's gonna be like, hey, Coach Chandler, something's jacked up from the game. I can't do this press, or I can't do this single leg thing, or I can't hold because my grip is messed up because I broke my finger. So things like that are truly just out of our hands. Like it just happens. Not to get into political. I don't think it's political, but KZ coming down on that hit. My goodness, you guys see that in the Steelers game? Anybody watch that? So my word, it's crazy. Like in those moments of like a defensive athlete and you have to make a tackle, things just happen like in the heat of the moment. So to the way that the sport is played, and even with protections, things are always going to happen. So a sport like football, if you want to walk away, I don't think a team has gone a season without an injury. I think it might be impossible, to tell you the truth, playing the sport. But on our side of things, I think that soft tissue is something that we can move the needle on a little bit. I think that a lot of those things come down to preparation. Like, are you fit coming into the season? Are you fit coming into your competition? If you are, then you're already ahead of the game versus somebody that maybe is a little bit low on the fitness side. I mean, once you're fatigued and now you're out there, now your mechanics are breaking down, and now you're in a very non-linear environment, it's really asking for trouble. And then on the resistance training side of things, I think going back to really good foundations and practices, I need my movements done in really big ranges of motion, really controlled, really good eccentrics, legit movements that show you control throughout the entire form. And then outside of that, I typically do pad the workouts with just some like weekly checks that I need to get into the program, whether that's from core strengthening to some single leg work to some like deep knee bending work that maybe some guys don't get in the bottom position of a squat, like deep knee flexion work. And we did pretty well this year in terms of soft tissues as well. I think that we had less than 5, I think, across the whole team. And then those weren't for more than a game. It was just like, hey, he has that hamstring, maybe modified during the week. So we didn't really lose any big players from any games, which is really great. We didn't have any like season ending like ligament type things. We did have some like foot fractures, which is kind of the name of the game too, like linemen getting stepped on. You can't really stop that from happening. And then something else too, like, so for baseball, I know like last fall we had a slew of like hamstrings, and kind of like what you were saying, sometimes the programming doesn't change and it's like, man, we have all these bicep tendonitis. That was something that we did have a bit of. We had some like shoulder bicep, like shoulder flexing tendonitis, and it was in our offensive linemen, like only the offensive linemen. So like taking that into consideration, maybe looking at their practices, looking at that sport, kind of makes sense that shoulder flexion is always going on. But back to baseball, yeah, last fall we had a decent amount of hamstring issues. And maybe not the quantity, but the individuals that it happened to were like players. So the staff, the coaching staff was a bit worried about that. The programming for baseball did change quite a bit this fall. The past falls, we typically would focus on general strengthening and just getting the guys really strong before winter break. Winter break would look like more of a de-loaded, like a lot of volume, more hypertrophy, and then rolling into the season would be catered towards the games. So we started using like velocity units last spring. So the velocity unit was a great way of mitigating stress and fatigue during the repetitions, during the sets, during the days, so that they could really recover. And then this past fall, I used the velocity units for the baseball team throughout the entire semester. So I went away from the traditional, hey, let's find an estimate for your 1 rep max. Let's program off of that. Let's progressively overload that. Let's get you really stinging strong before we get out of here. And I shifted that over to, hey, we're going to cut down on a lot of like quote unquote like power Olympic lifting movements. And we're just going to get the stimulus from our squatting. So we're going to squat really fast, really well, deadlift really fast, really well, come back next week. We're going to lift heavier, but we're going to be reined in by this velocity unit. So like looking into the velocity training, and I would love to use it with football. The only issue is the units that we use, they're small boxes with a line connected to the barbell. So they're not fragile, but you're working in a room that has literally like hundreds of pounds flying around. So they break if you're not careful with them. And not knocking my football team, but we only have 6 boxes and there's 100 football athletes, and 30% of those football athletes probably wouldn't handle the box correctly. So I'd rather not lose a couple $100 boxes. On my baseball team, the groups never get above 15 people. So 6 boxes to 15 people becomes insanely, or 7 boxes, 15 people becomes insanely manageable. Day one, we sit on the ground. I'm like, hey, this is how you're going to hold these boxes, how you're going to put these boxes on the bar. If this happens, you need to speak to me. So doing all that work on the front end, this fall's allowed me to just program for where they're at that day. So if you think like take Johnny, who we're coming in on Tuesday, he partied a lot over the weekend, he didn't sleep well on Monday, he comes in on Tuesday, hey, I need you to hit this speed 1 to 0.85 meters per second. And he's like, coach, this feels horrible. I'm like, like the estimated number, he's moving it at like a 0.5. I'm like, okay, sweet. Let's just default to the range that we need to work in, get the stimulus where we can get it, and we're going to leave. So it was a great way this fall to, if there ever was any recovery issues on their side of things, or on the inverse, you come in and you're having the best day of your life. And it's like, Coach Chandler, it only says 225. The range is like 0.75 to 0.5. I'm moving this at a 0.9. I'm just like, well, let's meet where the stimulus is at. Let's train in there to get our stimulus from that, like, quote unquote, percentage that it would be. So rather than being percentage based and based on like a 1 rep max, I base it off of where they're at that day. I give them an estimate, like, hey, you should be moving this weight for like 0.8 meters per second. That's where I would like them to warm up and start. If they don't hit that, then we course correct and get in range and default to the range to get the stimulus from the training. But yeah, for football, it really just comes back to preparing them well on the fitness side. I really think that's huge. And going back to, like, I guarantee if you're like, hey, let's run 10 110s for our conditioning tests, people are going to pull their hamstrings. Like, it's just going to happen. And then also in season, big ranges of motion, something that I typically do in season for football on my side of things to like limit that overall systematic fatigue. Once we get into week 2, we typically cut our deadlifts and we shift them for like a trap bar or barbell RDL. And we do other hinge movements like on the Wednesdays. And then for the squats, we did same thing, like week 1, week 2, we did band assisted accommodating resistance. So we would set up like a thick black like road resistance band, like on a safety hook. So the top like 3/4 of the squat would be loaded normally, and the bottom fourth would be like deloaded, like maybe like 80 to 100 pounds. And what I found with that is guys were able to like put the weight on their bar that up to 75-80% in season, so like relatively heavy working loads. The bottom, the most like stressful position debatably, was a bit deloaded, so it allowed them to maintain like a good amount of strength, and also like the movement itself was less taxing. Same thing for the deadlift, by shifting that out to like an RDL and prioritizing like speed and power on those Wednesdays rather than like anything heavily eccentrically loaded or anything just heavy in general. It really helped in terms of like them being ready for a Saturday. And then I think the next biggest thing is just, communication with your athletes and communication with the staff. If those don't happen and I'm just like, man, I got the best program in the world and I'm just writing it up on the board and guys are like, Coach, I'm hurt. I'm like, don't care. Go off the board. You're going to run into issues. Like things have happened where, and like even inside of that, like I see the schedule, I see the games that are going to be physically very demanding and very fatiguing. And I'm looking at all of these factors in the beginning of the season, from when am I going to take out the deadlifts? When am I going to shift to band squatting? When are we going to stop conditioning? When are these big, season determining games? It's like, okay, I know that they're going to be crushed after this slip game. I need to have the week before leading up to it look appropriate. I need the week after to look appropriate as well. So I think like all of those things go into us controlling what we can control, which is a very small amount of things, because once you get on the field, there's so many, everything's out of our control essentially. There's just 22 guys out there trying to kill each other. So
yeah, no, I think it's good. You mentioned some of the two things you mentioned. First of all, I wanted to clarify, when you say you're adding bands, are you doing like the reverse band where the band's at the top, or are you actually meaning like accommodating resistance where the band's attached at the bottom?
Yeah, so the band is
I know Bobby's big on those like suicide or voodoo squats or whatever it was he was doing, where he was like sitting back on the band. That's not what you're talking about.
Yeah,
right?
So that's what I'm referring to. Yeah, so
Okay.
it's like the way that our racks are is it's like a cage. Like it's like a cage. Like this is the rack, and then you would unrack it and step back, and then we have a safety hook like along the middle there. So we would put a band across, so you would sit down onto the band.
Mm-hmm.
So things that are happening in there, as opposed to like connecting it to the barbell, one, it's not going to mess with your rack position, like on your back. So that would be something that we would get into. The bottom position, your hands would shift, the bar would shift, and then the movement would look a bit ugly because of that. Also, you're still going to get axial loading, which would be lowered if it's pulling up on the band itself. And then if anything, like the squats just become better. like looking at like, why can't we get our athletes to squat deeper? Why can't we get athletes to squat completely? I think it has to do something with something in like that high hip flexion, deep knee bend, big amount of dorsiflexion that needs to happen. And then also like something in the pelvis, like in terms of like needing to have enough balance to drive your weight back to your heels while also spreading the floor, driving knees out. And you get to that bottom position and it's pretty exposing for a lot of athletes. And in the past, like I have like a 320-pound lineman and he can't squat to depth with anything over like 135 pounds. If I'm going to prioritize the movement over him moving weight, then for his position, I'm wasting my time. If I'm like, hey, Johnny, I need you to only squat 185 because that's the only way you can squat all the way down to the ground. This dude is 330 pounds. Like, that's not going to move the needle on anything unless we're doing sets of like 20 or something in the weight room. So it's a great way. And outside of like football, Bobby uses it for track and field and interspersed in there. I use it for softball interspersed throughout there. And it's been a great resource, not only in like managing fatigue, which I think is like honestly like maybe a secondary benefit for football, but the squat form just gets better. Like squats look really, really good with that bit of assistance in the bottom, like allowing you to get to that depth to actually train there loaded, which doesn't really happen unless you're at a very sub-maximal weight. And if you're at that sub-maximal weight, it's going to be harder to drive those adaptations to make you better in that bottom position. If I'm only goblet squatting, it's like I can goblet squat all day long. I have a good bottom position there, but if I'm adding a load to my spine, things get iffy. So it's been a great tool for just helping squats in general, really.
Yeah. No, I remember when Bobby was kind of sharing that with us. It's pretty cool. Honestly, I don't know how we would be able to set that up with our rack, because I've thought about when Bobby sent that to us. I'd have to go back and look at it again.
Yeah. He sent out the last spring. He was sending out those. Yeah, it's been like, and the guys love it. The football dudes love it because they're like, I can move a lot of weight and I'm not going to be crushed after today. So like on their side of things, they're seeing it as I'm moving more weight. I'm not crushed. On my side of things, and the narrative that I drive, initially people are like, I don't want the easy way out. And I'm like, well, you're squatting deeper than you were before. And in the range that you were squatting before, you're loaded the same. So if anything, you're doing more work by squatting to complete depth now. Now that complete depth is slightly deloaded and you're still loading yourself in your half of a squat, which you're already doing. So like once that kind of clicks in athletes' minds, they're all like, why don't we just always do this? I'm like, I'm trying to find reasons why we shouldn't always do it.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And then you guys, this is the last thing I have about this, and I want to switch over to some stuff that's going to be more geared towards, being a young coach. You guys using V-True, right? That's a VBT that you're using.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So again, just kind of these last like 10, 15 minutes, I want to kind of shift it because like I mentioned to you, with all of my assistants and interns and everybody, and even where I'm at as a coach, like I still to an extent consider myself a young coach. This, whatever my 10th year, like you said, your 4th or 5th year overall. So I think all this stuff is still beneficial. So the first question I have is, what do you think are some of the things that, the biggest changes, the biggest improvements, the biggest things that you've learned? And it doesn't always, and when I say that, I don't mean like X's and O's. I don't mean like learning that squat. I just mean like maybe even your thought process of when you were fresh out of college to where you are now at Cal. What are some of the things that maybe you struggled with, or that you wish you would have known then, that you think about more often now?
I think that, and I feel like I've said this to you before. I feel like I find myself saying this frequently when people ask me the question of what did you think before you got into the field. So like as an athlete, I was like, oh, strength and conditioning coach, easiest job in the world. You got to say lower and you got to say racket, and that's all you got to do. And I could do that all day long, baby. It's like 4 words there. So, and then I remember like week 1 of being a graduate assistant, I'm just like, holy crap, we coach. Like there's more that goes into this than just cues and yelling and blowing whistles. So I'm sure that all of you have found that out by now by sitting here. And even if you've only been here for this semester, I'm sure that that's been figured out, that there's more to the job than being loud and running around and energy. And I think like inside of that as well, like I remember when I was a graduate assistant, so just coming out of like playing, and then coming to a school that was a division lower than where I played at, I think that there was definitely like a bit of like I feel like ego would be the appropriate word, or just maybe like a bit of posturing. Like I think I felt like I needed to act a certain way. I think that statement itself was like I felt like I needed to act anyway at all. I think was a bit of a misunderstanding of what the job is. I feel like, and then I see it too with like interns and GAs when they start up. I can tell that they are acting how they think they should act in that position. Like this is how a strength coach acts, quote unquote, or this is how Chandler acts, or this is how Bobby acts. And for myself, I was acting like quote unquote strength coach. I was like, my chest was extra puffed out every day. Head was extra shaved, beard was extra big. Probably talk deeper than I typically talk, but it was all for like, I need these individuals to respect me or something like that. And I think that there was like a massive amount of freedom that came to myself whenever I stopped acting and just started acting like myself, essentially. And I'm sure that you've all experienced it if any of you've done athletics or being in the weight room and seeing other coaches interact and operate. I think that athletes are insanely smart. I'm sure you've seen this too. It's like when a person is selling you something, or a person is demanding something or asking you something, and everything about their actions and character is speaking to the opposite, it gets really hard to trust that person. So it's like a lot of, you're not that guy kind of moments like you see as an athlete and you see as a young coach. And on your side of things, to avoid those moments, you just lean harder into yourself. So that's kind of a talk that I have with my interns and GAs day one. I need you to be active on the floor. I need you to find issues because everything can be done better. And if a day goes off without a hitch and that was a perfect day, then I probably needed to do something better. Like if nothing's going wrong, I should probably work harder to find the things that I'm missing. And on their side of things, it's like, hey, become competent in some realms and then master those realms and immediately give feedback, immediately coach. And for them, and I say this every time a young coach comes in, a graduate assistant, intern, work study comes in, it's like the longer that you wait to take those steps, the longer that you wait to start coaching, to build relationships with athletes, then the harder it's going to be to whenever you decide to actually take those steps. So if you wait a month or 2 months and it's like, okay, today's the day I'm going to go coach up some guys, you're going to go up, you're going to walk up to a dude and you're going to be like, hey, I need you to go lower on that, or you're doing this wrong. He's going to be like, I thought you were just the person that stood there and didn't coach or didn't do anything. And it sounds kind of harsh, but a lot of athletes don't really have reservations to telling people their mind. So I think it's a trap not to fall into. And I think a good way of not falling into that is being an active coach and also like learning yourself and becoming comfortable with yourself and figuring out what is your coaching style. I'm not a big yelling guy. I don't yell. I think I get loud. I project my voice, but I don't know the last time that I don't know if I've ever yelled at an athlete for an issue. And on my side of things, like going back into it, I don't think I talked about like philosophy or like my mindset, but I have an agreement with athletes. Nothing's written on paper, but it's said. It's like, hey, I'm asking like 4 or 5 things from you. I'm asking you to be on time, use the correct language, wear Cal U gear, and try. And like, that's straight up the only things I need. And it gets really, really easy for athletes. It's like, okay, Chandler just wants these 4 things from me. If I'm on time, we're good. If I don't swear, we're good. If I got on a plain shirt or a Cal U shirt, and if I'm giving effort, we're good. And then we're going to get from point A to point B. You can walk, you can run, you can sprint, you can be sad going point A to point B. But if we're doing those 4 things, we're going to succeed. We're going to go head that direction. And it took me a while to find that. It took me a while to lean into those 4 things, but I think it makes it really simple for my athletes. I have no idea what the original question was. I was just ripping there. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. You just kept answering more and more questions, so it was all good. I wanted you to keep going. I think to me, like again, everything you said, I completely agree with, and I think that's something that I've definitely changed a lot over the. I mean, if you ask Ryan how I was as a coach back when I first started working at Pro, I thought I needed to be with a bunch of 12-year-old unathletic kids at Pro. I thought I needed to be a D1 football strength coach. You know what I mean?
I remembered it a little bit. I was there for I think the transitioning period.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest transitioning period was working in pro baseball, because I thought that I could talk to professional athletes the way that I saw, Mike Joseph and Darryl Bauer at WVU talking to some 18-year-old football player that was just a pain in the ass. And you look across now, and you're dealing with professional athletes that have played professional baseball longer than I've been a strength coach, and they're just gonna, give you the middle finger and tell you to fuck off. Like, dude, I've been doing this way longer than you've been coaching. So it was one of those where it was a humbling experience for me, and it forced me, just like kind of like what you mentioned. One of the other things that I think about when you walk into the weight room is like putting your ego aside, but that goes just as much for the strength coach as it does for the football player, the basketball player, whoever it is. Like, we need to realize that, like you said, I like the idea of being in an agreement. Like, and this is something that, again, sport coaches don't love to hear this, but I always tell them, I don't work for you. I work for the athletes. Like, I do not work for a sport coach at Fairmont State. I work for Fairmont State athletes. That's it. That's who I work for. And they don't love hearing that, because they think that we should be their right hand, like henchmen, and their punishment people and all that stuff. And I don't do that stuff. Whereas, again, maybe 10 years ago, that would have been something like, oh man, I can't wait to yell at this kid and make him do 1,000.
Yeah, like what that does is it actually just makes our athletes resent us, and they just hate me. And then it's like, sweet, you're doing exactly what I'm telling you to do, but you hate me, you don't want to be here. And now that number 4, the effort, is going to be filtered through, how much am I going to care about this guy? It's like, oh, I don't care, I'm not going to train hard. Oh, I'm training sub-maximally. Well, then we're actually not going to move the needle on performance now. So.
Exactly. And again, and everybody on here can probably tell you, is there times where I've definitely yelled. You said you've maybe never yelled in your career. I've definitely yelled. I've probably yelled at least once a week at somebody. But I think that for the most part, and I hope most of our athletes understand that it's coming from a place of trying to help them and trying to make them better. And it's more or less, again, being frustrated with the fact that maybe they're not giving me kind of those agreements that we've talked about as much, or a lot of times there's times where also I'm frustrated at myself, and I'm letting that show because maybe I didn't coach it as well as what I should have, or I didn't explain it as well. So again, there is that idea of, it is an emotional situation. Like, you have to be, there's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of like effort and time and passion that goes into being a strength coach, just like there is being an athlete. And I think it's one of those things where, we have to realize where our faults are at times as strength coaches. So again, that's kind of my, almost other end of the spectrum, whereas you kind of came in it already with a better mentality probably than what I did. And I having 4 or 5 more years of experience, I'm finally feel like I'm figuring out, like, hey, you can be passionate, and you can be loud, and you can be emotional, but make sure it's just coming from the right place, and you're not just doing it just to be an asshole. So you mentioned like the students that you guys have and the GAs, and even go back to your own kind of career path. Like, what do you think makes somebody successful? Like the GAs that you guys have had, the student assistants that you guys have had at Cal, like what makes the ones that end up going on and getting good jobs, like what makes them the most successful? What makes them stand out the most? Like, what kind of commonalities are there between you and between Bobby and between those students, and kind of setting them up for success?
I feel like I'm not a huge, me and Bobby and I, whenever we're looking or considering somebody for a position, we do our best to try not to bias decisions. If we ever start if he ever starts a sentence with, well, Chandler, when you were a GA, we both know, well, that's not really appropriate for the moment. But I think that like looking like good qualities that assistants have had from GAs to interns, I think that it's the buy-in to the room, and it's keeping you in the room years after you step into it, would just be like passion and effort. I can tell whenever things on the periphery are being handled so that you can be here. It's like, oh, I have work that I need to do, or I have social things that I need to do, or I have all these other things that I need to do. On my side of things, if I never hear about that and you're just always on time and you're always present, that means that you are checking a lot of boxes, because I know you have a life. I know you have things going on. When I was a graduate assistant, I was working 24 hours on Saturday and Sunday, like overnights. And I was doing the master's program. I was doing all these other things, and I was there for my hours and more hours, because something in that passion that I want to do a little bit more. It sounds really simple, and I don't know how to tangibly give that to you, to give you a want to do this, to give you a passion to do this. But I think that without a doubt, that's been a common denominator, like people that just love helping other people, which I think is the job in itself, is just helping people, and helping people become better at what they want to do and achieve things that they may not know how to achieve. the passion for it is it's really, really fantastic, really huge, and taking care of the little things before they become big things, essentially. Like going back to, it's like I'm positive that all of my assistants have personal lives, and I'm not saying it's like, hey, don't complain about things or don't have issues like on your side of things, because everybody does and everybody's going through things as well. But it's definitely a testament that we go through a semester and someone's like, man, that was a like a lot of things were taken care of on the periphery, and it's like, wow, I didn't even know that because you were just so invested into this. So I think on your side of things, like just start investing into yourself, like investing into I know you said not X's and O's, but just invest into learning the field and invest into just helping people and like what it is we're actually doing. It's like, we're working on the board and there's a couple movements to coach, but at the end of the day, I'm here to just help you. I'm here to help these athletes. And I feel fresh every day when I walk into the building. I don't feel burned out. I feel very focused because my things on the periphery are being handled, and I can come in to work and I can just do the work and I can just be in it and help people. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's all good. I think I completely agree with you. And I think the one thing that you mentioned is like focused on yourself. Like, and I know that for the most part, I think everybody in this group does a good job of taking care of yourself first, like making sure that you're sleeping well, that you're eating well, you're hydrating, that you're training. Like you have to be training yourself, and kind of getting into the trenches a little bit on your own time, to make sure that you know what it means to strain and what it means to basically put all this periodization and general adaptation syndrome kind of into practice. I think that's a big component. And yeah, I agree with you. Like there's a big aspect of just being kind of all in on something, even if you're only there for one day a week or you're there for 40 hours a week, like just being all in on it.
Yeah. And there's this beautiful thought, if you have like a clear goal, like if your goal is to be like the best strength coach ever, or to be the best husband ever, or best wife ever, or best, like whatever it is, if you have like a clear goal in your mind, then every decision becomes an easy decision. Like every decision in your day becomes really easy. I say this to my athletes because they're in, and you all as well, like in a college environment. It's like, if you want to be great, decisions are going to become easy. And if they're not easy, then you're just not really clear on what it is that you want, And I say this to my athletes, I'm like, hey, you guys want to be, I'm talking to them in the summer, you guys want to be great football athletes, then all of your decisions should be filtered through your goal. It's like, should I, eat an entire birthday cake for lunch? It's an easy one. Should I stay up a little bit later? It's like, well, it's an easy decision if I have my goal. Should I go and binge drink on this weekend? It's an easy decision if you have a very clear goal in mind. Should I help, like whatever the question is, and if you find yourself running into questions, it's like, man, I'm torn, or man, I don't know where I should go, or it's like, I think I know what I need to do. Like if those words are coming to your vocabulary, it's okay. You just need to really relook at what it is that you want, because if there's a conflict, that's just telling me you just don't know, or you're not entirely sure like what it is that you want, if those questions are hard to answer for yourself.
Right. No, I agree. I think, and again, it's that kind of cliche, you're either all in or you're all out kind of mentality. And if you're having to make those hard decisions, answer those hard questions very often, then you're probably not putting yourself in a position to really get after whatever it is that you say you're chasing after.
Yeah.
And I agree. You mentioned back when you were talking about the velocity-based thing where a kid comes in and he's hungover still from the weekend. Like, I just sometimes, like, again, it's probably because I'm 30 some years old and I don't do any of that stuff anymore. But it's one of those things where it's like, I don't understand the logic behind that. You say you want to be a great baseball player, a great football player, but yet every single Friday, Saturday night. And that's one of the things, one of the guys that
He just doesn't.
Yeah.
Based upon like, and myself, like looking at myself, like my freshman and sophomore year in college, that wasn't my priority. It wasn't my priority to be as great as I can be. And looking at our positions and like looking at our job, and I you sent me the questions, and this was something I did want to talk about. Just like what is our role in this, and like even diving deeper, both of us at this Division II level, like where are the transfer portal is something else now where athletes could jump up to the next level and get more eyes on them. But traditionally, this is a setting that less than like 0.25% of these athletes are going to go to the next level. So like taking that in mind, you look at your teams, less than 0.25% of them are going to go to a professional league. with that in the front of your mind, what is our role as strength coaches? It's, in my mind, it ties back to, it's like, hey, I need to just meet you where you're at. Going back to that agreement, like we're going from point A to point B. If we're going that way, we're winning. You can go slow, you can go fast. I need to meet you where you're at, because it's very, very likely that you're not here just to be an athlete. It's just the way that it is. That might, at different settings, that very well may not be the case, but at the setting that we're both working at, and all of us on this call are involved with it, it's very true that a lot of our athletes are just here to do it, which is completely fine, because my job is, regardless of where you're at in your life, regardless of if you're a 6-year player and you're like almost my age, or if you're 17 years old coming in, if you're a starter, if you are a special teams guy, if you don't play at all, it gets really easy for me to just meet you where you're at. It's like, hey, we need to move the needle. Let's go from point A to point B, and that's going to get us ready for the field. And I'm always going to program for the field. I'm always going to program for practice. I'm always going to program for in and out of season, like for the field itself, because other areas of this are not going to meet you where you're at. It's like, hey, it's inside zone in practice. I don't care that you're tired. We're going to kill you. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, it's 2-minute drill in a game. I don't care where you're at. And on our side of things, like if the weight room is taking away from those times that, if it's taking away from a game, if it's taking away from you being able to give it your all in a practice because of like a programming thing on my side of things, then I don't think I'm doing the job correctly. Not saying we don't train hard, because I would say anything but that, but it's just time and place. Like we're not going to do sled pushes in season until guys are falling out and throwing up. It's just not appropriate. We're also not going to run you guys into the ground on a Monday because we lost that on a Saturday, because it's not appropriate, or it may not ever be appropriate. So just meeting my athletes where they're at, I think, is really, really huge. And I think that that's how you build relationships, and that's how you get those bubble athletes become invested into the weight room, become invested in what we do. Whenever you sacrifice a little bit, just a little bit of whatever that may look like. Anytime that you find yourself prioritizing your program or a movement or a lift or numbers or your time over top of like an athlete's well-being or like their needs, then I think that's where that resentment comes in, and that's where you have issues.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think we're going to wrap it up there just for time's sake. And honestly, it's just a good thing to leave it on. I did want to ask you, it's kind of crazy. You mentioned the portal though. Have you guys had guys? I know you guys have had people in the past, but is it still trending where you're sending guys every year up a level? Because we just had 3 guys this year. Our 3 best defensive players are all going up to the D1 level, which I never would have thought would be the case coming in to the D2 level.
Yeah, there was a lineman from Gannon who got offered. I don't know where he got offered, but he got offered somewhere. So then, like, he wasn't the best defensive lineman in the conference. So then you look at debatably some of the best defensive linemen in the conference, like on our team, and they're like, well, why shouldn't I just go and play at a bigger school? And it's that point in time that it gets hard to knock it. Like I can't be mad at it. I can't be upset about it. I think that going back to like what our role is, like meeting athletes where they're at, it's like, okay, like you're making an adult decision. So there's going to be adult ramifications. It's like, hey, coach, can I come in and lift? It's like, no, you can't come in and lift with the team. Like you're not on a team anymore. You've made some decisions there. But yeah, it's really interesting. And I know that like one of those questions was like the future of strength and conditioning, the future of athletics. That portal, I'm so thoroughly, I think more so lately I've become to maybe appreciate it a bit more, like allowing some of these athletes that have really great potential that just may have got lost in it or maybe needed an extra year or two of development to get to that level. I think it's cool to think that they may have a chance to get on like as big of a stage as they're going to get to, or as big of a stage as people get to. I think that's amazing. On the and I don't know if this is portal talk political, but I know that like Coach Prime in Colorado, it was just like hearing about it and hearing like the preseason hype and like expecting, regardless of what their team looks like now or their record, like just that preseason, like they had the most transfers ever. I think it was like seven. I'm making this number up. I feel it was like 60 or 70 athletes transferring.
75 kids, 75, I believe.
So that's like a team. It's like a whole fully stacked team. Like, I see that and I'm like, who are we benefiting now? Because 30 of those 75 are going to play like decent time. So I wouldn't say that the other ones are getting benefited unless they just enjoy the experience. I think the biggest people benefiting in that is Colorado. We're cashing a lot of checks there. And, I don't know how I feel whenever we start like looking at that picture. It feels like a bunch of people using a bunch of children to sell tickets. That's what I feel like. I don't like to call my athletes children, but if we're 18, 19 years old and you're making these massive decisions, it's like, I'm going to go play for Coach Prime and you're riding the bench for 4 years. It's like, well, I don't really know who's benefiting from this. And whenever it starts drifting away from the athletes, then I start having a bit of trouble with that. But like immediately, like looking at the localized level, I see some guys that are getting some chances. So that's cool. I'm excited for them. But on the broad side of things, I think that when it becomes like a whole team or it becomes like that, it just feels like we're selling tickets at that point, and we're kind of drifting away from helping people, to fill in pockets.
Yeah. Well, and that's just, honestly, that's a whole, like you said, that's a whole debate about Division One, especially Division One football, Division One basketball in and of itself.
Already before the portal, it was still like that.
Yeah, 100%. It's a very, yeah, the whole thing is kind of becoming the Wild West on that end. And honestly, there's times where I'm thankful that we're not in that as much. I mean, we definitely have kids hit the portal every year. And like I said, our 3 best defensive players are all gone this year. And it's one of those things where, like, part of me, because I liked all those guys and they all were good for us and they helped us win games this year, it sucks. But the other part of it is, it's like you said, like, it's awesome for those guys to go get an opportunity, because all 3 of them probably should have an opportunity to play at the next level because they're all have that potential. So it's an awesome opportunity for them. But I was talking to our football coaches yesterday, and this is the last thing I'll say. And I was telling Caleb and Tyler this, like, it's almost anymore now. If you're a college football coach, a college baseball coach, all you're worried about is trying to recruit kids for one semester. You're trying to recruit them for one season, because you're not really getting the same number of high school freshmen coming in or college freshmen coming in from high school on your football team and graduating 4 years later. Like, they're probably not going to be at your school even after 1 year if they don't get to play. If they don't get to play their freshman season, there's a chance that they're gone. And again, whatever that people's opinions are on that, like, it's almost changed recruiting to the extent where it's, hey, what can you come in and can you play? Can you contribute right out of the gate? And if you can, then come here. If you can't, then we'll kind of move on to the next person. So it's kind of a dynamic.
I think that the initial portal opening was rough at Cal U at the time. Like, it was a controversial time over here when that portal initially opened up. And then I think now, like, in terms of like our staff, probably the most relaxed they've been in like ever about it. They're just like, well, we're going to have 5 people coming down. Like, I think I saw, like, this past week, I saw like maybe 4 transfer recruits like come in for visits, and we normally don't see recruits until January. And then we had a weekend visit with a bunch of athletes too. So it's, like, same thing. Like, I think their mind has shifted a bit. I feel like it's easy to be a bit pessimistic about it. Like where is my work going? Where is all like the people that entered the portal this past year? They were guys that were with me for the past 2 summers, for like months of me just training them, essentially. You know what I mean? But like, going back to like principles and goals, it's like, I'm here to prepare this team for the field. I'm here to meet these athletes where they're at, and it's going to be that today and tomorrow. So regardless of who's in front of me.
Yep. Agreed. All right. Does anybody have any last minute questions for Chandler?
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. It was really an honor. I was excited. I forgot to tell you, whenever I first read the text message, I read it completely wrong. And I was like, I perceived it as, hey, Chandler, can you come and talk to my staff 1 to 2 times a week for the whole winter? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's just fill up multiple days. I'm like, let's do it. It'll be something for me to do. And then I reread it. I'm like, oh, one talk. That's so much more doable and manageable that, yeah.
No, yeah, well, I don't know. I don't know if I sent it weird or what, but yeah, I'm glad you were able to do it. And we honestly got a lot of. I know my list of questions is like 2 pages long, and I knew we were never going to get through it all. But I mean, we kind of, like I said, just the couple questions that I asked, there was where you were, touching on a bunch of different things that kind of got a lot of it accomplished. So I appreciate your time, and we'll definitely have to catch up sometime and enjoy the rest of your break. And,
yeah, thank you. And if anybody needs to reach out to me, my email is daniel@pinwest.edu. Daniel's my last name, pinwest.edu. Yeah, thank you guys.
All right, man. Appreciate it. Thanks,
All right,
everybody.
I'll see you.
All right. Have a good Christmas, New Year.
You too.